From the beautiful city of Detroit, this is your Daily Detroit for Thursday, September 3rd, 2020. I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. You know, Jer, they once called Detroit the Paris of the Midwest.
It's an apt name.
On today's show, we'll share what to know around Southeast Michigan.
Plus, Sven talks about a movement to make food not waste with local activist Danielle Todd. Let's get started. There is a lot of COVID-19 news today. The newest is that gyms and pools can reopen, and so can football, basketball, and soccer, even though they're recommended to go on the back burner, says Governor Gretchen Whitmer in a new set of executive orders and a public statement. They reopen Michigan's gyms and pools and allow for organized sports practices and competitions to resume across the state if all follow outlined safety protocols. Gyms and pools can reopen next week, Wednesday, that's September 9th. You're going to need to wear your mask at all times if you hit the gym, including when you're exercising. Workout stations will have to be at least 6 feet of distance between users, and you'll see smaller class sizes at your local fitness center, among other measures. When it comes to sports, spectators for indoor organized sports are limited to the guests of the athletes, with each athlete getting up to 2 guests. For outdoor sports, the same rules apply, or the venue could limit the total attendance to 100 people or fewer, including all participants, including athletes, coaches, and staff. Although this opens the door for things like high school sports, Dr. Jonah Khaldun in the press statement strongly discouraged participating in organized sports and said that there were more than 30 outbreaks in athletic facilities in August. I will put a link to all of this in the show notes. Now, the latest top-line numbers. The state of Michigan reported an additional 685 confirmed COVID-19 cases Thursday, with 10 deaths. That brings the total since this whole thing started to nearly 104,400 cases and more than 6,500 fatalities. Michigan's RT level, or transmission rate, continues at 1.03. And Macomb County is the only county listed as having accelerated spread over the last 7 days in the Tri-County, or 10-county Southeast Michigan region. That's according to globalepidemics.org from the Harvard Global Health Institute. So the news broke late Wednesday night that Macomb County Executive Mark Hackel has come out against Governor Whitmer and her powers to declare and enforce a state of emergency. He threw his support behind a petition drive called Unlock Michigan, a Republican-led effort to repeal laws that have been in place for decades, giving the governor wide powers during a state of emergency. In an interview with Crain's Detroit Business, he said that there is no need for a state of emergency if you look at the data, and alleged that the governor was making arbitrary, not data-driven decisions. He then went on to try and dispel rumors that he's actually aiming for the governor's seat next election. Hackel himself could be charitably described as a conservative Democrat, but whose political affiliations tend to be amorphous. Hackel said, "Mark Hackel isn't running for governor. Mark Hackel isn't mad at the governor or hates the governor. Mark Hackel's asking questions because he gets asked by these businesses, and I don't have an understanding, and that's inappropriate," unquote. We will put a link to the full story in the show notes, of course. I would note here that Hackel was among the first to lift the state of emergency in Macomb County, and that Macomb County has a larger share of cases than its population within the state. And I'd also note, as I've been following this, if you're a listener, their COVID-19 email updates that they share with the public and the press generally do not talk about case or death data. Sven, I know you have some thoughts on this one.
Mark Hackel is the ultimate political wind vane. I think he's concerned first and foremost with hanging on to his office and not upsetting the apple cart. You know, they actually grow a lot of apples up there in northern Macomb County. You know, it was interesting in the story from Crain's, which we'll link to on their website. He resorts to the kind of tried and true trick that Republicans and other critics always fall back on, which is to parse data. You know, like, oh, the percentage of people who die from this is so small. You know, it's just not I don't understand why we're making these extreme, you know, like shutting down the economy and going to these extreme measures to deal with this. It's not that big of a deal. Yet, you know, nearly 1,000 residents in his county have died to date, which is not an insignificant number. I mean, it's hard to imagine any other category where in 5 months now, I guess we're into it, you've seen 1,000 deaths. Macomb's percentage of the state's COVID-19 cases and deaths are disproportionately larger than Macomb County's share of the state's population. And he just seems to be kind of echoing the official COVID response from the GOP of kind of like, I'm starting to think of it almost in terms of like their sort of ethos of like, let the market decide, which is a ridiculous notion here in the light of a pandemic, right? Capitalism clearly has shown no ability to effectively deal with this global pandemic, frankly. And as I've said many times, like the economy and COVID are essentially the same thing. Like you cannot, like if you get a hold on one, the other, like they work in inverse, right? Like when COVID rages, the economy is terrible. Even if COVID is sort of like in between, like a consistent level of suck, as you put it, the economy's still in crisis. The only way we can fix the economy and get things back on track is to get the health pandemic under control.
I wasn't going to say anything, but you've motivated me, Sven. Couple quick things. First off, I have been talking to various business owners who have said, you know what, even if they are allowed open, they're just not seeing the foot traffic for their in-person businesses and things like that, because there is a worry out there among the public, and these businesses aren't designed. And it's not like they're running up against the 50% capacity thing all the time. I'm hearing stories of folks seeing 1, 2, and 3 customers. So like this is a different thing. I think there's people who are still very worried about their health. The second thing I'd add is that when people start referring to themselves in the third person, that is a clear red flag to me that the plot has been lost, man. Like Mark Hackel says.
It's very Bob Dole-esque. Bob Dole used to talk about himself in the third person famously.
Oh, that's right. I remember that. I remember that. But here's the other thing. You're talking about parsing that data, and this came up in my mind, is that one of the things that we know when it comes to coronavirus is that it has an exponential growth curve. It means that 10 can turn into 100 cases, can quickly turn into 1,000 cases. And we saw that with the reopening down south. We've seen this over and over again. And so just saying that our levels are under control doesn't mean we actually have our hands around the virus. Now, I know from like my previous school classes and things that exponential numbers are just a hard thing for people to get their head around because they're so used to +1, +5, +1. But this is something that truly can just explode very quickly. And I think that's part of the thought behind these kind of measured reopening steps.
Right. One final thought I have on this concerns the actual petition drive, the Unlock Michigan, right? The drive to strip the governor's powers to declare an emergency in the state. If this petition drive is well funded, and well organized, like I have little doubt that they'll be able to collect 300,000 signatures from, angry, disaffected voters. I mean, I don't think that they're the majority of residents by any means, but the way this is going to work is if they can get it, it goes directly to the legislature, which, ding ding, is controlled by Republicans who can easily vote to approve it. And then the state of emergency goes away. And I would just note that it's reminiscent of what happened over in Wisconsin earlier this year. A little bit different, though. Over there, the state Supreme Court, also controlled by Republicans, voted to strip the governor there, the Democratic governor, of his powers to declare a stay-at-home quarantine emergency. And so they basically, they opened up the state. They gave the local counties, the decision or the ability to decide whether they wanted to open. But, they have seen a corresponding rise in COVID cases. They actually were not one of the COVID hotspots in the country, and now they, their daily case counts are generally higher than Michigan's, even though Wisconsin has a lower population than our state.
There are new guidelines around the use of force by the Detroit Police Department. On Thursday, the City of Detroit Board of Police Commissioners approved changes that were proposed in June. The new directives include a ban on chokeholds, and I'd note that this is in direct response to what happened to George Floyd earlier this year. There is now also an order to have a minimal reliance on force and require use of a de-escalation practice. new reporting measures for when an officer threatens to use force, and a requirement that officers intervene or intercede when others use excessive force, and also report it. There are also extended reports to come around the use of force and discipline actions that will now be made public, which I think is pretty key. The board shared that they support peaceful protests, but also want people to participate in the oversight process, as there is a role for civilians. There's a phone number to report feedback and complaints about police. I will share it here and put it in the show notes. That's 313-596-2499.
All right, switching to cars. We have our first look at the new 3-row full-size Jeep SUV that the company will build at its new plant taking shape on Detroit's east side. Jeep on Thursday unveiled images of a concept version of the Grand Wagoneer. They're believed to be similar to the version that's due to go into production starting next year. We'll share some of the images on dailydetroit.com. They show a very boxy-looking large SUV with squared-off windows and elongated rear end. The front has a clean, modern look with a long LED light line connecting the headlights and backlighting the Wagoneer logo, which is stamped right above the grille. Photos show off a decidedly upscale interior as well, and there are many, many screens. An instrument display in front of the driver, separate screens, one for infotainment and the other for climate and seat controls on the center stack, a front passenger screen for settings and watching media, and a pair of screens for the second row.
You know, Sven, I am no car expert like you are, sir, but I gotta tell you, I looked at this thing. It looks like the bastard child of a Cadillac Escalade and a Lincoln Navigator. It's just like more of, I'm just not impressed. It looks like you took the two cars and you smushed them together and you called it a Jeep.
Well, I am, let me qualify. I'm never really a fan of vehicles that are this big to begin with. I mean, the class of Navigator and Escalade, I just think that I can't get over the size, and I just think it's just excess, and, they're gas hogs typically, and they weigh a lot, and,
I mean, it's a show-off purchase. It's not a practical purchase.
I mean, there are definitely some nice touches on this. I mean, the interior looks very comfortable and luxurious. There's some nice finishes. There's some nice sort of creases on the car, some really elegant. I actually think that the front, looking at it dead on from the front, looks kind of nice. And again, we'll put pictures on Daily Detroit. But yeah, I think this one's a little it's hard to sort of disguise the sheer size of this thing. I mean, it reminded me a little bit of the Chevy Suburban, which is just a behemoth car. There's a awkwardness about the rear end. It just looks like it's proportioned weird. I don't know. There's a slight awkwardness to it. I was talking with some of my auto writer peers at Autoblog, and they pointed out that Jeep has always sort of had an awkward time with some of its larger vehicles, pointing out the Jeep Commander, which was a really boxy and awkward-looking model from yesteryear. And it'll be available in 3 different 4-wheel drive configurations, and it'll be sold under both the Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer names. It'll start at around $60,000 and climb into the 6 figures, possibly, for some of the more upscale versions. Parent company Fiat Chrysler is investing $1.6 billion to transform its Mack Avenue engine complex to build the new Wagoneer line of SUVs and the next generation Grand Cherokee. The plant is expected to create nearly 4,000 new jobs. And shifting gears, so to speak. You like how I did that, Jer?
Very good, sir.
General Motors and Honda announced a new memorandum of understanding on Thursday to share technology. It strengthens a previously announced plan that will see Honda use GM's electric vehicle technology to build a pair of its own EVs to go on sale in the U.S. by 2024. The new agreement expands the partnership to jointly develop electric powertrain technology, internal combustion engines, vehicle platforms, infotainment, safety technologies, research and development, and more. The partnership is seen as allowing both companies to save money on development costs that they can then use to invest in advanced technologies. Engineering work is said to begin early next year.
Big picture, how big of a deal is this?
It's hard to say. I mean, this is one of those things. There's no, I think a lot is yet to be determined, but I think this is kind of the wave of the future. I mean, a lot of automakers, famously Fiat Chrysler under, its late CEO, Sergio Marchionne, he clamored for years to tie up. Remember when he was trying to force a merger with General Motors, because he'd been saying for years that the cost to develop things like electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, was just going to be so high that automakers needed to find ways to spread the costs and partner together to do these kinds of things. So it remains to be seen, but I think you're already seeing lots of signs of this. Ford is doing some of the same kind of things right now with Volkswagen, sharing technologies and platforms and things like that. So it'll be interesting to watch, see what happens.
Detroit-based rocket companies, you might know them as Quicken Loans, posted a large quarterly profit Wednesday. This is the first time Dan Gilbert's lending empire has had to report fresh results to Wall Street since going public. The company's net income was an eye-popping $3.5 billion on business volume of more than $72 billion.
Damn.
Yeah. At this same time last year, they posted a loss of $54 million. Shares of the company are up nearly 46% since they went public less than a month ago. Work on the second phase of the I-75 rebuild project continues Thursday with a new development. Work crews will shift southbound traffic onto the newly reconstructed southbound lanes from Adams Road to 13 Mile Road in Oakland County. Previously, two-way traffic was sharing the northbound side of the freeway, while southbound lanes and bridges were being rebuilt. The shift should be ready by 5 a.m. Friday morning. The big news for our listeners who live or work in Troy is that the eastbound Big Beaver Road ramp to southbound I-75 will reopen. Northbound I-75 traffic will remain on two lanes from 13 Mile to Adams Roads. Both directions of I-75 will have two lanes open between 8 Mile and Adams Roads over the Labor Day holiday weekend to accommodate you up north travelers.
Man, this project's going to be a mess. I'm glad that I don't have to regularly rely on I-75. Last night, Jer, actually, you and I were hanging out together at the North End headquarters. When I left, I was going up to visit somebody who lives in Oak Park, and my intent was to take 75 to 696. For reasons I won't get into, I accidentally got off at 8 Mile, just out of force of habit. That's near where I live. And when I tried to get back on I-75 from 8 Mile, you can't anymore. The entrance ramps are closed. So I had to take a big, long detour to get up to I-696. But, it's just a mess. Like, it's just going to be a big headache for a lot of people. Joining us to discuss the virtual community feast events they have planned next month is Danielle Todd. She is founder and director of the organization Make Food, Not Waste. Danielle, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit to get started here about the organization Make Food, Not Waste and why the focus on food waste.
Well, Make Food Not Waste started in 2017, and we are primarily focused on helping people figure out ways to waste less in their home cooking. And we focus on it for a few reasons. We come at it from an environmental standpoint because when we throw away less food, it has a huge impact on the environment. But what we find too is that when people learn new skills of how to make their food go further, it adds a new element to their cooking. It makes it more fun, and it saves them a lot of money. There are estimates that people can save anywhere from $1,600 to $2,000 a year just by learning how to use up all their food and not throw it away.
Interesting. So you work with a lot of local restaurants as well as organizations like the James Beard Foundation. Is that right?
That's right.
Tell me a little bit about what you guys do.
When we started out, we were committed to making sure that we have a lot of joy in what we do and we have a sense of community. And for the first 2 years, we held a large event at Eastern Market called a community feast. And we invited chefs from all over Detroit to make dishes from food that we sourced that would otherwise go to waste. So the other idea was that people would come, enjoy some dishes, and think to themselves, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe this food was going to be thrown away. It's so good." And we invited a lot of organizations from around the city as well that do something related to keeping food out of landfills. So that might be composters or food recovery organizations or other educational groups. There are local food products that use up food in their chutneys and their jams. We wanted to create the feeling that there's a lot happening here in Southeast Michigan and really connect people to the greater community of people who care about this important issue. So this year, of course, we aren't able to bring thousands of people together at Eastern Market. So we challenged ourselves to maintain that sense of excitement and joy and community and translate that into something we could do virtually for people. And we're excited that feel that we've done that with a cooking series that will be airing online throughout September. And we just went through our network in Detroit and connected with mixologists and chefs and bakers and talked with them about how they use their tips and tricks of how they can use up those bits and scraps. And a lot of them, how maybe they're in their culinary background and their cooking traditions, their different ethnicities of how maybe their families approached food in innovative and creative ways that those cooking traditions have always helped make sure that food doesn't go to waste.
So, what would be some examples of some of the tips that viewers might learn for, ways to reduce waste when they're cooking food at home?
A lot of the chefs are going to be talking about things like, how do you use that fruit that maybe is a little overripe? How do you use peels, even banana peels? How do you make stocks that can really enrich your dishes? I think one of the episodes that I'm really excited about is our first one with a mixologist, where they talk about how to make fun drinks, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic, that use up some of the rinds, and how you can make some syrups and really just, again, infuse that creativity into some of our drinks and our desserts and our dishes that now, as we find ourselves at home a lot more often, we can take those little bits and incorporate it.
Yeah, very cool. We were talking before we started recording here about, kind of excess food during the pandemic. Like, how has the pandemic affected food waste? I mean, you had a whole situation where restaurants, which obviously buy enormous amounts of food and in, kind of unusual quantities, not necessarily like, buying individual pre-cut chops of meat, for example, but rather like whole sides of a cow and everything, suddenly restaurants are closing down and ended up, many of them are still closed. So how has the pandemic affected what you're seeing out there in terms of perishable food going to waste?
We saw a couple of things happen. Immediately when the shutdown happened so suddenly, a lot of the restaurants all across the country found themselves with food in their kitchens and their freezers and their pantries and their storage that they now weren't going to use. And rather than just throwing it away, fortunately, I wouldn't say all, but probably close to all, found ways to get that food into the community, whether it's working with food recovery organizations locally here or giving it to their friends and family, just as a way to make sure that food wasn't getting thrown away. From a longer term perspective, what happened is, if you imagine the food supply, the way it works is you have farmers and producers and manufacturers are producing food kind of in two different streams. So one goes all to retail and one goes all to food service, places like restaurants, hospitals, schools. And so when you effectively shut down one whole side of that food system, all of that food had nowhere to go. So farmers who were finding themselves with food that was stuck in the fields, we saw reports of farmers dumping milk and culling herds. That was all because they had no outlet to send that food because it couldn't be easily switched to the retail side quickly. So what we find now is that There are some systems in place. The USDA stepped forward and they started a program called the Farm to Families Box, where they would pay farmers and distributors to pay the farmers to harvest the food and have it donated directly to the community. So that's happening here in throughout Detroit with a lot of different food recovery organizations. But we also find that there's, gluts that show up where manufacturers find themselves with tens of thousands of pounds of food in different ways, and they can't move it and they have to get it out. So they'll also work with food recovery organizations to donate that to the public. So it's not perfect, but at least we try to do what we can and support those efforts here in Detroit. And, we're just trying to make sure that we're capturing as much food as possible so it's not getting sent to the landfills.
So the cooking series starts September 13th. They'll be hosted by Amanda Saab, who was a contestant on the TV cooking show MasterChef. Do people need to register to see these? Will they be archived, or do they have to stream in real time? How does that all work?
They can go to our website, makefoodnotwaste.org, and they can go to our events tab and see all the different episodes. The episodes are going to stream one at a time, so you can sign up to be able to watch that link as it's aired. And then if you happen to miss it, you can always go back and watch it later.
All right. Very cool. Well, I look forward to watching along. Danielle Todd with Make Food Not Waste. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was great talking with you, Sven.
All right, that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. Tomorrow, barring major changes or major news breaking, we take a trip through the world of cheese, chocolate, and dried cured meats. Detroit-based Mongers Provision joins us for a virtual tasting in the Daily Detroit backyard, alfresco dining. I'll be joined at the dinner table by engineer Randy.
Fine food discussed from far away. I will say that Gus and Gray's jam was insanely good. I did some engineering on this one. I was not on the air, but I did get to eat all the things. And people, you are in for a treat. And it's a great way to relax in your own backyard. It's something where we can do social distancing, not get into large groups, and also enjoy some fine products from a local purveyor.
Indeed. If you have feedback for our show, love us, hate us, want to send us $1 million, you can do that at 313-789-3211. We've got a voicemail box set up for your voice right there.
And of course, if you'd like to support the show, that would be greatly appreciated. We've got stickers and other swag coming at patreon.com/dailydetroit. That's patreon.com/dailydetroit.
I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this together.